Hi everyone, my name is Deborah Stoll, content producer for M&M's custom team, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to today's webcast, Building Trusted Patient Relationships in the Digital Healthcare Era, sponsored by VMS Biomarketing. Biopharma is following in the footsteps of companies outside the healthcare industry by prioritizing the consumer experience and building sustainable relationships with patients. In this endeavor, brands are reinventing their patient engagement strategies to go, quote, beyond the pill, end quote, to become a holistic platform model. With a deeper understanding of today's healthcare consumer and a combination of innovative technology and data solutions, companies are realizing significant efficacy and efficiency improvements in their patient engagement initiatives. In today's presentation, Abigail Mallon, Chief Client Solutions Officer of VMS Biomarketing, will address proven strategies and best practices for insights on today's patient engagement environment. With more than 20 years of marketing leadership experience in the biopharma industry, Abigail provides the strategic direction, thought leadership, and vision necessary to innovate on all client-facing products and services at VMS. She has in-depth knowledge of pharma-related compliance laws and regulations across a wide variety of therapeutic areas and brands, and is the company's expert on regulatory compliance issues and privacy. A frequent speaker on patient engagement and medication adherence topics in the biopharma industry, Abigail has been a contributor to PM360 Magazine, First Word Pharma, Pharmaceutical Executive Magazine, and Pharma Voice. She currently serves as a member of the Executive Advisory Council for the Indiana HBA chapter and was named a Woman of Distinction by M&M in 2021. And now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to hand things over to Abigail.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. And Deborah, thanks for the nice introduction. As Deborah mentioned, I'm Abby Mallon. I oversee our client solutions teams at VMS Biomarketing. And just wanted to give you a little bit of background about VMS because I think it gives some context for the presentation today. At VMS, everything we do is centered around the patient. We are passionate about empowering patients to better engage in their health. And as we partner, to do that, we partner with our biopharma clients to develop these real and authentic and deep personalized relationships with patients that ultimately lead to better outcomes. To do this work, we leverage a patient engagement platform that we call One Voice. And that platform uniquely combines this data-driven technology with the clinical human intervention to deliver holistic support in a much more dynamic and personalized way. And one thing I think it's important to note about sort of the data technology and the human intervention, when you think about all the patients that we serve today, they're either newly diagnosed and facing extreme high stress times and anxiety, or they're facing a chronic or terminal illness. The one thing we wanted, as we're going to talk so much about advancements in technology and innovation in that space today, we never want to lose sight of that, the importance of the human connection, because they're always needing a listening ear and somebody objective to talk to. So as we talk about these patient engagement programs, our clients have been able to not only build persistent and sustained relationships with their patients, but they're also deliver a differentiated experience through gathering these rich real-world insights. So many times we know if a patient filled or didn't fill, but we don't know the reasons why. And so now with these new patient models we're putting in place and leveraging this data and technology, we really can dig beneath the surface and get to why patients are behaving the way they do, and understanding those insights can really help us really drive innovation in our programs and improve that experience on the front lines. So I'm excited to talk to you today about this transformation that's happening in the patient engagement space and the continued emergence of digital technology that can truly help you differentiate your programs. And as we do that, I want to first jump in, and as you think about building trusted relationships in this digital healthcare era, it's important to look at today's consumer and how they interact with their healthcare. And when you think about how we interact with our healthcare, it's very different from how we interact with retail companies like Amazon and Google and Uber. And so there's a lot we can learn from those companies, and we still have some significant gaps. But it's not all bad news. We've made some really great groundbreaking advancements in technology over the last several years, where we are finally beginning to follow in the footsteps of some of these companies outside healthcare. And so today we're going to talk about that digital transformation that's happening, and specifically we'll talk about the consumer wants and needs, and more importantly, their expectations from pharma. And then also share some best practices and strategies for how you can include some of these new digital innovations within your own patient support programs. So let's jump in and talk about consumer expectations. So when you look at the patient needs and expectations, patients continue to elevate their expectations of the pharma industry, and their needs are increasing. They're putting greater pressure on pharma to deliver this engagement at the right level, at the right time, with the right types of engagement. And there are many factors that are really driving this, but there are four main trends that continue to stick out. So the first trend that we see is, just as we just mentioned, the continued influence of healthcare consumerism. So when you look at the data behind that, 60% of patients now expect their digital health experience to mirror that of companies like Amazon and Uber. At the same time, patients are becoming more accountable to their health care, and they're providing a much more proactive approach to engaging with their health care. They're much more educated patients and expecting more services from pharma. 72% of patients report that they'd like to talk to their doctor about self-care regimens. And so when you think about sort of that consumer experience, they're wanting to manage their healthcare on their own time at their own convenience and not be sort of burdened with having to wait to go into the physician's office. And that's leading to more familiarity and preferences for virtual engagement. And certainly the pandemic has had a huge impact on that virtual engagement. Prior to COVID-19, only 11% of patients utilize virtual health. And now this post-pandemic era, we see over 76% of patients interested in utilizing virtual health telemedicine efforts moving forward. And so it's not just virtual engagement, but it's really patients in tune with more technology innovation across the board. We're seeing it in all industries, and now patients are expecting it with healthcare as well. And so I think one of the most interesting stats is it's not just the telemedicine efforts. They're really looking at new emerging technology. 67% of patients say they'd be comfortable utilizing emerging technologies such as virtual reality, augmented reality, and AI in their healthcare. And we'll talk about some of those tactics as we move through the presentation. And so with all this growth and increased consumer expectations of pharma, the market has seen tremendous growth. And so when you look at patient engagement specifically, the patient engagement space is one of the fastest growing sectors of healthcare, with the market size increasing to nearly $70 billion over the next 5 years. And that's fueled rapid growth from capital investment. So when you look at total venture capital investment, it grew 2 times over the last year and will be up to nearly $15 billion annually. So a lot of growth, a lot of investment, all shifting towards the digital healthcare space. So with the emergence of all these new innovations, there's a whole slew of new solution providers coming to the market, many of them focused on that virtual engagement. And so you're seeing a 38 times increase in virtual from pre-COVID levels. And then just in the US alone, McKinsey estimates that $250 billion of that healthcare spend is really shifting to digital health. So again, just rapid growth, rapid transformation. But how is pharma specifically responding to that growth? And what is the trust factor of consumers for pharma to be able to address their needs? So now I wanted to switch to our first polling questions. So when you think about sort of that trust factor, amongst HCPs, pharmacies, payers, government, and pharma, who do you think consumers trust the least? Is it healthcare providers, pharmacies, payers, government, or pharma? And so I'll give you a chance to think through that. Okay. So we should see the results coming in soon. Is that correct, Deborah?
I do believe that is correct.
Not seeing those yet. Just
maybe people are shy today.
There we go. Okay. Okay. So as you look at these results, it's interesting result. It looks like, people would be the least trusting of government, which makes a lot of sense. The one thing I'll share as we look into the data behind this is actually, still there's a lot of skepticism, right? And we still have a lot of work to do as an industry. Healthcare providers continue to be the most trusted, and pharma, unfortunately, still remains the least trusted. But government's right there. I do think it's interesting that people trust the government 2 times more than pharma. So that may say a lot for things, but. As you look at it, it's not all doom and gloom. So if you look at the right side of the slide and you think about the pandemic and its impact on trust, due to the collaboration and all the R&D and certainly the vaccines that pharma brought to the market during this time, there was a significant increase in trust of pharma due to the pandemic. In fact, 1 in 3 consumers reported an increase in trust in pharma as a result of the pandemic. So we have some momentum. We're beginning to build that trust back. It's on us now to really build on that momentum and transform our approach and really understand these consumer needs and expectations and deliver on that with new engagement models for patients. And as we are doing that and pharma is responding to that, you're seeing them really leverage digital technology to make this shift to more patient-centric models. And they're leveraging technologies like mobile health apps, remote monitoring tools, and natural language processing to really build these more dynamic and robust and personalized relationships with patients. And at the same time, simultaneously, you're seeing a shift in their commercial model. So traditionally, pharma has used sort of that traditional pill-based model where it's just treated just as, the illness or the medication in a silo. And now they're moving to more of this platform-based model where they're going beyond the pill and really treating the patient in a holistic manner. So not just treating the medication, but addressing disease prevention, wellness, preventative care, discussing post-treatment options, and just really understanding sort of that holistic support that patients need to integrate their therapy into their overall life. And in order to do that and to achieve this platform model, pharma companies need to establish these fully integrated partner-based patient-centered ecosystem. So what do we mean by that? That is pulling together partners who can bring the services, the data to understand and see the insights behind the scene that we need to address, and the technology together to be able to provide these more targeted and dynamic experiences. And as a result, you're seeing a whole new generation of patient engagement models that really include all of these elements. And so now I want to jump in and sort of talk about what these new models look like. And so when you look at these different models of patient engagement, it really is driving the elements that we're going to talk about today, all leverage and combine the use of the human engagement with the technology and the data to work in a synergized way to make sure that you're really having a more patient-centric approach. And as you look at the model on the slide, there are really 3 core elements to these new models that we're engaging in. And the first element is you look at the middle of the slide, is really combining this high-tech human care, and which is defined by leveraging technology to deploy scalable resources and to personalize your engagement. So what I mean by this is really this is sophisticated patient segmentation to really be able to customize your support and leverage support where patients need it most, and leverage technology and virtual where there's a little bit less of a need for for patients for the patient engagement piece based on their adherence risk score. So ways we've utilized this is predictive modeling, where we're working with the data set up front to understand patients' adherence risk. So looking at demographic, sociographic, psychographic variables, and looking at those in total, and leveraging technology to create an adherence risk score that's going to tell us whether patients are at a high risk, a medium risk, or low risk for adherence. And certainly you're going to put your human capital, your most expensive resources on the high risk patients, and those that need that are at less risk of adherence, you can provide potentially more of a virtual route based on their preferences. So really a sophisticated way to provide the right support to the right patients who need it most. And that's helping us to move from this one size fits all approach to more of this customized and hyper personalized support. The second element is the evidence generation loop. So this really ensures the capture of real world data and health outcomes, which creates an insights engine that can truly drive commercial innovation. So when you're implementing this part of the model, what you want to do is really sit down up front and really understand what are the outcomes you want to collect. What are some key questions that are going to help you understand what the clinical outcomes, understand and capture those clinical or quality of life outcomes, and then have a system that you can ask those in a systematic way, put them back in the system, and then feed them out and report on them to take action on them. So many times we're collecting a lot of these insights, but we don't do it in a systematic or centralized way, and then we can't do anything with the information when we have it. Lastly, the service management loop. This is all about the patient, capturing the patient experience. So really understanding and engaging with patients on the front lines, making sure you're capturing patient preferences and learning styles, as well as their confidence in their ability to manage therapies. So doing a lot of pre and post surveys to understand where patients are at in their journey, and then collecting that back in your system, being able to report out on that, and leveraging that data throughout the program to have continuous optimization through your program. So this is continuous learning and improvement versus going through an entire program and looking back and saying, what could we have done better? This is real-time optimization to help you improve your patient experience on the front lines. And when you put all of these three elements together, there are 5 key benefits that can really impact the programs that you have. First, you can streamline the patient experience. Second, you can optimize your resources, so utilizing the right resources at the right time, and not that one size fits all approach. Hyper personalization of your program, so really understanding what's driving patient behavior and addressing that and making that engagement really relevant to their needs. It enables you to make this support dynamic. So through all of this data collection, I think one of the most important things that comes out of this is that we can move from these linear-based patient support models where we've sort of mapped out every engagement up front, and we expect a patient to go through just like we planned out. And we know that that's not life. Life happens, things change in patients' lives, and they sort of fall off their journey. This enables us to look at the data and see where we need to intervene at just the right time to get that patient back on track. And lastly, just the ability to capture data, centralize it in your system, and then take action on those rich insights that come out of it. So really 5 very important key benefits to this model that we're seeing every day in the programs that we're managing. And so I just wanted to pause for our next polling question and ask the audience. So when you look at, the 5 benefits that we just talked about, which ones do you believe is most critical to your program success? I'll give everybody a few minutes to answer that. Okay. let's see what we have. Okay, yeah. So typically, what we see is, most all of them are impactful. It's hard to sort of decipher between which ones are the most important. It looks like the audience, believes that personalization is the most important, and absolutely agree. I think that's where we need to start to look at our programs and where, in all facets of our program, do we have an opportunity to personalize that support. One thing I will tell you, as we've begun, and this is what we're going to jump into next, as we begin to incorporate these elements into our patient support models, I can tell you some of the ones that are resonating most. Certainly, the ability to capture that data, because then that enables us to personalize that support in a more dynamic way. But leveraging that data to really engage at the right time when the patient needs it most. So that dynamic support has been incredibly impactful, because it really has a strong impact that we're seeing on the back end to reducing patient abandonment. And again, that's all about capturing the data and then being able to sort of leverage it at the right time. So let's talk about now and move into, what are some best practices and guiding principles for this engaging in this new model of patient support. So at VMS, we are beginning to implement this across all of our programs, and we've really taken a step back to say what has been sort of the best-in-class pieces of each of these programs that we're managing. We came up with 10 foundational elements of these programs that really have been resonating in the outcome of the program. So I'm going to go through each one of these and then talk about sort of what the concept is. We've got some industry validation of how we've seen this work out in the industry, as well as we'll talk about just the simple tactic for how you could incorporate this into your program. So let's jump into the first one. Establishing trust early on. So as we all know, establishing trust in any relationship is super important. A recent white paper from Deloitte, talks about trust is earned. It's earned over multiple interventions. And if you build that trust over these multiple interventions, you can truly impact health equity. And so when we think about what that means for our patients today, if you can introduce patients to this go-to resource early, at the earliest time possible in your patient engagement program, it gives you the ability to earn trust over a long period of time. And the way we have been able to do that is really engaging the patient engagement go-to resource at the time of consent, rather than waiting till further out in the journey. So I think when you look at typical programs of the past, you've really seen when you've looked at programs in the past, you've really seen that you've gone through the benefits investigation and waited till the medication has been shipped and they have medication in hand, and then you engage your patient engagement provider. So engaging your patient's engagement provider sort of after that benefit investigation process can be, might be too late. So when you think about when a patient is going through that benefits investigation process, it's, those first few hours and days where it can be the most challenging times that they're facing. They've just been newly diagnosed. There's high stress. There's lots of anxiety. This is the time that we need to build trust. So if you can partner between your hub and your patient engagement provider to provide this go-to resource earlier in the process, you can really mitigate patients falling out of therapy, eliminate some of the emotional concerns that they're facing, and just truly build this very trusted relationship. So, and the way we've been able to do that is a simple API feed where the hub provider and the patient engagement provider have a two-way API connection that enables them to share data back. So immediately when the patient opt-ins or provides consent, then the patient provider and that go-to resource can proactively reach out and engage with that patient at the time of consent, where they can explain the entire process that's going to happen and hold their hands through the process. So this is earlier the better has really been an effective tool that we've seen in our programs. Second, providing consistency. So if you do establish that trust early on at the time of consent, and you have this go-to resource engaging with the patient, you want to make sure that it's a consistent primary point of contact. So we all know there are so many different players within our patient support program who all play a vital role. Providing a primary point of contact can help really explain the entire process, explain what's going to happen, set expectations, and again, hold their hand through that whole process. Because we know there's so many things, particularly in that upfront engagement, that typically, can take anywhere between 2 to 8 weeks or more. And there's so much that can fall through the cracks. And so if you have this consistent resource that's constantly troubleshooting and working on the patient's behalf and communicating status updates back to them, it can be a huge game changer into the experience that patient has. And a recent Walters Kluwer article talks about appointing a champion. So appointing a champion is seen as one of the best ways to set the stage for patient engagement success. So one of the ways that we have done that is we've established a consistent go-to health coach as that just-in-time resource, engaging at the time of consent through benefits investigation, through getting patients started on therapy, through all the way through their adherence support. And some of the things to think about is that, that this go-to resource does not take the place of the hub or the specialty pharmacy or any other providers that you need to have in place. They are really working with them behind the scenes to communicate and translate to the patient on the front lines as to the status of what's going on. So it can be really valuable if a shipment, if they see in their data that a shipment didn't go to the patient, they can immediately jump on the phone, call the specialty pharmacy, see what happened, and then immediately and proactively call the patient and let them know, there's been a little bit of a glitch, and this is how we're working through it, and you can expect your medication shipment on X date. So just easy, simple ways to be able to mitigate patient abandonment in those first few months of therapy that are so critical. And as you think about that consistent point of contact that needs to troubleshoot and provide status updates with patients on the front lines, you want to make sure that your front lines go-to resource can build direct relationships with the patient. So this is all about the ability to share data back and forth because we want to equip those front lines with all the information they can to be able to answer those patient questions, because we all know there's nothing more frustrating than being transferred to one team member to another team member, having to repeat yourself multiple times. So we want to mitigate those barriers and really make sure that we are engaging with partners that are willing and able to systematically and compliantly share data back and forth. It is critical to that experience on the front lines. The way we are able to do this is through omni-channel consent strategies. So really looking and making sure that you have e-consent to share that patient information back and forth. And then secondly, I think one of the things that can be underestimated but is critically important is when you set up those sharing agreements. So these are the API feeds back and forth, making sure you have common data definitions. Because if you're not defining data in the same way, when you get that feed, it's hard to make sense of what it says. So really spend the time up front, have partners working together as a team on behalf of the patient to set the system and the data feeds up in the right way to make sure that we can equip the frontlines resources with the right information with patients to mitigate, having to transfer them and or not being able to answer their questions in the moment that they need it. And then when you think about sort of the importance of sharing data, you also want to make sure that it's not just sharing data, but you've got to be able to mine the data that you have. So fourth is listening and learning from these interventions. So we want to make sure we're capturing the voice of the patient at all points of engagement. We want to utilize that information that we're learning, that patients are sharing, to feedback that into your program and influence how we can optimize and create a better experience as we move forward. Also, insights that you get can inform brand decisions and new patient innovations. And so I think this is a great article from Pharmacy Times, where it talks about the proper insights are the eyes and ears of the life science industry. Without them, or without the proper use of them, pharma companies are flying blind. So again, it's not just capturing it, but you have to be able to get the information out and do something with it. And that's where we utilize natural language processing, which is a form of AI that really systematically mines data from call recordings to pull out key themes, key topics, keywords that are going to inform if, maybe there's an issue that's happening on the front lines when you see it in multiple calls, and or can just drive, again, these program optimizations. So when you think about, customer experience centers, doing thousands and thousands of calls, there's so much data just sitting there. And we need a really efficient and smart way to be able to mine that data and make that data actionable. And that's what you can do with natural language processing. So I think this is going to be a big area of innovation advancement that you're going to continue to see moving forward. Fifth, making it convenient. So this is back to that healthcare consumerism trend. We want to make sure that we're delivering engagement for patients that meets patients where they are and enables us to integrate our support into their daily lives. We need to make it easy and convenient. So going back to what we shared earlier, 61% of consumers state that they want their healthcare experience to be more like the experience of companies like Amazon and Uber and Instacart. They're utilizing more apps to manage everything on their phone when they're on the go. It's all about convenience. And just one simple sort of low-hanging fruit to be able to incorporate this into your program is simply just asking a series of questions up front to understand their preferences and their needs based on their learning styles. And if you ask just a few simple questions, it really can direct the timing of your engagements, how you engage, which channels support. Are they more of a virtual learner, or are they more of an in-person learner? The frequency of how much you engage with that patient. So a lot of rich information can just be captured just by asking it. So when you look at all the aspects of patients, all the different foundational aspects of best-in-class engagement, personalization is, of course, one that rises to the top. And when you look at best-in-class programs today, that's all about, making sure that we are personalizing all facets of the program. So the interventions, the level of support, and even the topics that you are engaging on with each patient. Certainly a lot of, articles and validation for that have been are out there. A recent article from McKinsey reports that patient engagement leads to better a patient experience, a higher quality of care, and the reduction of avoidable costs from non-adherence. So truly, as you personalize different aspects of your program, it can ultimately impact your bottom line. And the way we have done that in our programs today is utilizing predictive analytics that I touched on before, but really utilizing a sophisticated way to understand sort of population data to understand their adherence risk, and putting that into an adherence algorithm that gives you a score, and that's going to tell you the type and frequency and cadence of support for each individual patient. And that's really when you get to this hyper-personalized support that can really make a truly differentiated experience for the patients that you have. 7, keep it simple. This seems really basic, but sometimes it's one of the biggest things that we miss. So when you're sitting down up front to design your engagement programs, you want to make sure that you bring the patient lens to that discussion. So sometimes we're so close to the program and we build this fabulous program, but at the end of the day, it's pretty complex. So you really want to look at it through the lens to say, where can we reduce complexity? And I think one best practice is having somebody come in to review your program that is not involved in it, not as close to it, to really look at it from the lens of the patient and sort of determine where things, where you could reduce some of the complexity of that program. Another way that we have done that within our programs is to really look at the technology and making sure it's user-friendly, as well as engaging self-service tools. So you may have a very dynamic interactive program with sort of human elements and digital elements, but also make sure you have some self-service tools in there that when patients may not need that live component, that they may want to just manage it on their own. And there's some very intuitive, user-friendly ways to do that. 8, going beyond the medicine. So this goes back to sort of that shift to moving from the pill-based model to really treating the holistic patient in this platform-based model. So you want to include elements in your program that are not just addressing sort of the typical financial, logistical, and clinical needs, but also looking at nutrition, wellness, and in my opinion, one of the most important aspects that we can do is provide that emotional support throughout the program. And the ways that we've done that is engaging a health coach. And one of the things I think is best that they do is goal setting. So they're setting goals for the patient and they're talking about those goals throughout the program. Sometimes they have nothing to do with the medication or therapy management. And it's really helping them get back to their normal life and feel normal and not be sort of defined by their disease. And it creates these small wins along the way that you're engaging with that patient. So again, really looking at the holistic patient journey and how you can incorporate some of these emotional aspects into managing, to helping patients manage their therapy. 9, be empathetic. So this is all about, again, the balance of technology and the human intervention. It is not an either or approach. You really want to have a balance of both and really, adopt and utilize your human connection for the most high-risk patients who need that white glove support, and leverage your digital for those, who may need less in-person support. And lastly, incorporating an HCP feedback loop. I think this is one of the most underutilized of the guiding principles that we see, but it can be super impactful. So this is simply, the fact that you have HCPs and offices enrolling patients into your support program. And, you want to make sure you're creating awareness of how their patients are doing in your program back to them. And so it's a great way to create that awareness of your support and also encourage a much more robust patient-physician dialogue. So one of the ways that you can do this is build an automated feedback loop. And that is really, if you have an HCP portal in place, you can connect your patient engagement provider into that portal through a feed and upload sort of the patient summary information. Of course, you need to do it in a compliant and a secure way. And there's lots of guardrails around doing that. But when you work through those guardrails, you can really have a robust way to share really valuable information back to that HCP office. Another way, if you don't have a portal set up, you can set up just a patient summary email. We do a lot of patient summary emails back to the office to make sure that they just have a quick summary of what happened during the engagement for the patients that they opted into the program. One of the barriers that we do see is that sometimes, just the way organizations are set up, sometimes your patient services are in market access or a centralized patient services group. And then you sort of have the brand handling all of the HCP activities, and they're not talking to each other. So you really want to make sure you are incorporating sort of your brand strategy and your patient support strategies and working together. And a great way to sort of connect these is through that HCP feedback loop. And again, as long as you're doing it in a compliant way, they can be really impactful. And so those are the 10 elements that we've sort of incorporated into the programs that we manage today and have seen to be very effective. I thought I would do our last polling question. And just to say, of all of the guiding principles that we talked about, and I hope everybody got to hear all of them with the audio challenge, and apologize for that. But of the 10 that we talked about, when you think about sort of the change required from pharma to implement these, which one do you feel that requires the most change from today's approach to patient support? So we'll give everybody a minute to think through that. Okay, so it seems like a balance between sort of, providing this consistency of support, building sort of these direct relationships, the personalization again, and sort of going beyond the medicine. So what I can tell you just from the programs that we've, and I think those are all exactly right. I think what stands out from the programs that we manage is building that direct relationship does require a lot of coordination amongst all vendors. So some vendors have been in place for a long time. They have, robust data systems set up, but they're not sort of equipped to share with others. So getting everybody in the same room to understand the journey of the patient, really create those data definitions and know what you need to share back and forth to equip people with the right information on the front lines can take some time and does require a bit of change. And that consistency of support, just sort of how you have your contracts set up with your hubs and your specialty pharmacies, is also another one that we see that you really need to work towards to sort of move to this more one voice, consistency support model. But what I can tell you is when you work through those challenges and everybody's sort of working together as one seamless team, it can be extremely effective. So as I just wrap up here, I'll just leave you with, I think we all know, but there is no silver bullet. It's a complex, challenge ahead of us as, we continue to see new innovation in this market, but we have to work through our organizations and our systems to get things implemented. But I think we all know it's our responsibility to continue to push ourselves, address these consumer demands and needs, all to build these more authentic and sustained relationships with patients in the digital healthcare era. So thank you all for your time today. I think we have a little bit of time for Q&A. So Deborah, I'll turn it back to you for the Q&A.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for that incredible overview, Abigail, and apologies again for the kerfuffle. Yes, let's get to some audience questions. And please know that if we don't get to answer your question today, Abigail will be taking the time to answer them via email in the days to come. So the first one I have is, you mentioned having a consistent point of contact as a best practice. Does that mean the hub is not talking to patients directly?
No, it really depends on sort of how your hub and specialty pharmacy situations are set up. The hub can definitely still talk to the patients and, really address, their expertise in the benefits investigation. Really where the nurse comes in or the health coach comes in is to really troubleshoot. So they are setting expectations. They are talking about the process and what that process is and who a patient can expect a call from. And then if something falls through the cracks, they can work on the back end with the hub and provide that status update to the patient. So they are really sort of setting the stage, but certainly the hub can still, and many still do talk to patients on the front lines.
Great. Okay, I have another one for you here. Are you working with companies who have a data aggregator to centralize the data? And if yes, how does that work in the primary point of contact model?
Yes, so we work with many clients who have data aggregators, and it works just similar to the hub integration. So you really are setting up a similar API feed that's going to enable you to share that data back and forth. I think it's really important when, as I mentioned earlier, in particular with a data aggregator, because they have so much data coming in, to really define upfront the data that you need, and then how you're defining that data when it comes over, because it really, if you don't spend the time to do that and really align in those things, you're going to get data that's not usable, and you're going to have to spend a lot of time going back and redoing some of the things that you set up in the first place.
Redoing things is never enjoyable. Here is another question for you. What do you think is the most challenging part of implementing the predictive? Sorry, what do you think is the most challenging part of implementing the predictive models you are using?
So I think when you look at, working towards sort of this more hyper-personalized, sophisticated segmentation, it's all about the data that you're getting. You either need to have access to the data set, and you can get that from companies like IQVIA that already have, and typically a lot of companies get this when they're launching a product. They're getting that data set that already has sort of patient characteristics, all of that demographic, sociographic, patient characteristic information. So you can buy that data set. You may already have it, and you can leverage that to put that into your predictive algorithm. If you don't, and a lot of smaller companies don't have that data set, a simple, more organic way to do that is to create a predictive assessment that is going to, determine what are the different questions associated to understand what a patient's risk for adherence is, and ask those questions up front in a systematic way. And then you take those answers to the questions, feed that back into your system, and your algorithm that's then going to spit out a patient risk adherence score. So it's all about, the ability to access the data that I think is probably the most challenging part of the model.
Got it. And in the HCP feedback loop, how are you able to share the data back with the HCP?
Yeah, so there's a lot of, you want to make sure that you have systems to set up and share the information in a secure way. And you want to make sure you're working with your compliance teams to make sure you have the appropriate guardrails in place. And then I think the most efficient way to do that is if you have an HCP portal, and then, you're working with patients by a specific patient ID that ties back to that physician, and that can be uploaded into that HCP portal, and they can just go in and look to see how their patients are doing within your program once that information is loaded. So that's probably the easiest way. Again, you can also set up secure emails as long as that physician's office gives you the approval to send emails and understands that that's how you're going to be sending the communication based on their specific the patients they opted in. And then lastly, also, some companies have field nurse teams. And so if they are engaging with both the HCP and the patients, you can have the nurses go back into the office and share, those updates in person in the office as well.
Got it. Interesting. I have two more questions I think I see right now. So one, are you able to share data in real time back and forth between vendors, or is it delayed?
So it's both. The ideal way to do it is through the API feed, which is, two-way real-time sharing. We do still have some programs that are sharing it more on a daily basis. So you can do it both ways. Again, sharing it in real time is just going to give you the most immediate access to information to be able to respond in the moment patients need it. So I would recommend the two-way API feed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I have another question here that came in. You mentioned providing dynamic support for the patient and being able to engage at the right time. Can you share how you have done that?
Yeah, so I think we touched on this a little bit, but I think everything is about having access to the data. So it starts with these API feeds, setting up these appropriate data definitions, but if you do that right, at any time in your program, you can go in and look at a dashboard and see the status of the patient. Most of the just-in-time dynamic support happens in that first, 2 to 8 weeks, because there's so many things going on at that time. So many different, parties reaching out to the patient, and so there's a lot of things that can fall through the cracks. So you want to make sure you can see on a screen when a shipment is happening, if they've received it, if they didn't receive it, if it was approved, if the medication was approved or not approved. If it wasn't, it enables you to jump in, call the hub, see what's happening, and have a proactive explanation to the patient. So it's all about access to the data and allowing those frontline resources to see that. I think most times just the hub is involved in that and they're having conversations, but if you're engaging with the patient on a more regular basis, again, holding their hand through the entire process, if that primary point of contact can have access to that, they can troubleshoot and really streamline and really mitigate prescription abandonment is really the outcome that we're seeing in our programs.
Got it. Well, Abigail, unfortunately, it looks like that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank you on behalf of MMM, and I sincerely want to thank VMS Biomarketing for today's webcast. Also, a big thank you to all of you, our audience, for tuning in and participating and hanging in there. Today's webcast will be available on demand on the MMM site under the events/webcast tab for up to 1 year. So you can revisit it and you can tell others who didn't make it today where to find it. Once again, thank you, everyone. We hope you're staying safe, and we'll see you soon.